Every time one of these videos starts with an unboxing, I get a bit excited as it means that whatever I'm taking out of its packaging is brand new. In this case, an EVGA RTX 3060 Black Edition. Really don't know how I feel about this card, and I don't mean this particular EVGA one, I mean 3060s in general. It has the obligatory crap ton of RAM to placate schoolyard dispute. My card has more RAM than your card and so on and so forth. Not sure how useful it is right now, but it might become a good thing to have in the 2-3 years to come. Really, that's not why I'm not 100% sold on it. No, I am annoyed that the chip shortage has taken the shine from this otherwise great low mid-range card, and it has forever dashed its dreams of usurping the 1060 as the world's premier gaming GPU, at least on the Steam survey. Most of its existence it's been ridiculously expensive. I myself paid £375 for this one, way more than I was comfortable with, and that wasn't some scalp price. No, that was from the EVGA Q system. Nickels aside, it's time to build it into a system for which I chose arguably the best mid-range configuration money can buy in mid-2022. There is a case here to be made for going 12th gen Intel and sticking with DDR4, but I chose the red team this time. Don't panic about that puny cooler on top of the 5600X, that was just there for testing and to get replaced with the proper one once it's out of my test bench and into its proper case. The SSD I'll be using is the WD Black NVMe unit that I feel is the sweet spot for this machine at 500GB. Less and it would be a hindrance, more and the money would be better spent on something else. Dealing with the brackets that we'll be using later and affixing the Ryzen 5 sticker on the wrong I/O shield, it's time to tackle the RAM. The right way of doing this would be to stick a low latency 3600 or 3800 kit in there, either 16 or 30 GB, and be done with it. But no, I chose the 4400 Mbps Viper kit. I think that this is a ridiculous waste of money because the F-clock will never be able to run at 1:1, you are, I'm afraid, 100% right. But logic is not something I take seriously. I end up using the AMD-centric second XMP profile that is still a ridiculous 4266 Mbps, but at least the voltage is reduced to 1.35 volts instead of 1.45, so I won't have any misgivings about daily use. To go all out and use two identical 16GB kits, but the motherboard would have none of it, with only one kit being certified to run in it. Speaking of that motherboard, today I'll be using an Asus X570 Prime P board that will do exceptionally well in this configuration, as it is still a high-end board but not an astronomical high price tag, a reasonable £130 that I simply forgot off the bill of materials. Oh well. To the case and PSU install, and here's where things took a turn for the ugly. While trying to shove this Gigabyte 700W PSU, I realized it is one of those cases that you load the PSU from the outside and then affix a bracket onto it, and said bracket was missing. So acting like nothing is wrong, I proceeded to load the motherboard while I cooked up a scheme to replace the bracket with something else. What I ended up with is these three small aluminium plates that I pre-drilled to fit both the PSU and the case. I even painted them black and did the same for a couple of screws to match, but I was late for barbecue, so I had to hurry up using them while the paint was still a tad bit wet. Anyway, after everything was installed, I think it ended up looking decent. This is the 240mm Cooler Master AIO I will be using for this build. It's more than enough for the Ryzen 5 65W, even when turning on PBO and unlocking all the power. Even in Prime 95, it still won't go above 74C, basically means we are good in every scenario. A quick squirt of thermal paste and a lot of wire management later, and it's time for the GPU to go in. Frankly, that's about it. Let's start it up and oogle the RGB. Oh yes, I did install a 2TB hard drive in the bottom of the case, and I could show it to you or show you any pictures, but I simply forgot to take any, so you're simply going to have to take my word for it that it turned out alright. Parts will also be a bit shorter than usual because time constraints meant I could only do one pass. Nevertheless, it will be representative of performance. Start off as usual with Heaven, and at 193.8 FPS on average, benchmark provided no great gasp of surprise as it slots in neatly between a 2060 and 2070, but more importantly it pulverizes the 3050, which only scored 129.8 FPS in this test. Superposition, which is a much newer benchmark compared to Heaven, offers more of the same, with the 3060 doing rather well against its lesser sibling and slotting just below 2070. Difficult to call Rocket League a GPU benchmark anymore, as in my experience the performance is almost exclusively dictated by the CPU, and the 5600X really does not disappoint. I remembered after the fact that I forgot to turn PBO on all the benchmarks, so if the hilarious averages here aren't to your liking, you might be able to do even better. And again, you might need to wait a few years until a monitor fast enough hits the market market to take advantage of it. This time I only tested one Fortnite configuration, again time constraints, and I chose the one I think most people will go for when using this system, Epic with DLSS on. Ray tracing stays firmly off because I feel it's nothing more than a gimmick in this game. I don't know what happened to the Party Royale map I usually use for testing, so this will have to do instead. Over 150 FPS on average means you will have a good time on most monitors. There are a few dips here and there, but they will never go below 100 FPS, so you really can't blame your poor performance on frame drops. Horizon Zero Dawn did exceptionally well with 122 FPS on average with ultimate settings and DLSS. The game might be considered the anti-Elden Ring, but after playing and enjoying both, while I would give the gameplay brownie points to Elden Ring, Horizon Zero Dawn still sits on my benchmarking roster because it doesn't have a frankly idiotic 60 FPS limitation, graphical options that don't do anything. Even better, since launch, Sony continuously added new graphical features. X Control, which is a game that takes proper advantage of ray tracing. I upped the settings to high because the bottleneck is always the RT core, so you might as well enjoy the eye candy without the FPS guilt. Though the game is technically rendered at 720p, DLSS makes that more of an academic point, even on my 34-inch screen. This GPU posts an unbelievable almost threefold increase over a 3050 and also comfortably beats the 2060 by about 18 FPS, hovering at a 990 for most of my playthrough. Assassin's Creed Valhalla does predictably well with 80 FPS on average, especially after its updates. Although I can't really wrap my head around a couple of massive stutters, I think something must have been happening in the background. Oh yes, and this result is at ultra high. I thought that when you are spending over £350 on a car, the minimum you can demand is ultra high at 1080p. He's gone at very high runs with FPS in excess of 90 in the game's opening chase sequence, making it a great experience. Unfortunately, there is no FSR or DLSS to turn on here, but very high is silly. If you're after more performance for a monitor, just drop down to high and enjoy a big frame boost. For me, I'm happy with over 60 in this game, but other people who are doing silly things with hordes might want more. In Warzone, I again used the auto settings and it ran with about 127 FPS on average, but to be fair, there is a lot of optimization left in there, so you can tailor it to suit your playstyle. In Farcry, I turned everything all the way up plus FSR, which I set to ultra quality, and ray tracing, with the last one being there just as a token because I really can't tell it when it's on and off unless I look at the frame rate counter. In the benchmark, it did do very well with 86 FPS on average, but depending on the scene, that FPS could drop down all the way to the mid-60s, so if that bothers you, just turn off the RT features. I promise you won't notice a difference. And lastly, Cyberpunk, which is a game that you'll definitely notice when RT features are on or off. For this run, I set everything to the RT Ultra preset and DLSS to quality that led to a very stable 51 FPS on average. I know it's not exactly a brand new game anymore, but I still think it's one of the, if not the best looking game ever made. Just count how many times I stopped in the middle of a chase just to look at some small detail like how the light interacts with the car or how pretty an explosion can be, and that for me makes it a good trade-off to sacrifice 9 FPS off the magical 60 number to have all the eye candy thrown at you. And that's about it for this one. I hope you enjoyed it and have a great day.